Tell you that.
That music festival was like less than a half a mile away from Direct Impact, bro. That's way too close. Somebody at Harp got it out for Spain, bro. That looked cataclysmic.
That was crazy.
Rocks Park, a patchwork of interweaving trails built around a field of ancient diabase boulders. But what makes this glorified pile of riprap so interesting? Well, as it turns out, these boulders are natural lithophones, rocks that ring like bells when struck. In other words, they sing. But here's the thing, these rocks are changing, and in ways that you might not expect. Slowly, of course. Just about everything in geology happens very, very slowly. And honestly, it's probably nothing to worry about. It's happening so slow that it won't actually matter in any kind of real-world sense. But it triggered an existential spiral of sorts, which led me down the most fascinating rabbit hole that I found myself in a while. Back in 2023, I went to go see this geological oddity for myself. My goal, conduct acoustic testing, collect audio samples, and follow up on a local legend I'd heard through the grapevine concerning a mysterious concert that took place at the Rocks in the late 1800s. Docio, to gnaw away. Lithophones. Erosion, from the French érosion, which is from the Latin erosio, to gnaw away or consume. I wrote this piece 2 years ago, that day at the Ringing Rocks. I call it Erosion. It definitely gives 20th century minimalism vibes. That is, it's difficult to play, and for many, it's probably even more difficult to listen to. 8 percussionists, 8 rocks, all playing the same simple half-note pulse. Borrowing a technique from gamelan called kotakan, each player progressively displaces the rhythm by a 16th note, creating a fast, interlocking texture. In the West, we might also describe what's happening here as phasing, inspired by Steve Reich's clapping music. This method of interlocking patterns between players is how gamelan achieves its insanely fast, iconic melodies. Whoa. Erosion is aleatoric in a sense. Each performer will sequentially drop out according to some mode of chance. Maybe you draw straws, maybe you roll dice, maybe you skip rocks. As each voice goes quiet, a new composite rhythm will emerge to the listener until we're left with nothing but a stark silence. The idea is to notice the empty space, to contemplate erosion, and to sit with the feeling of fading into the nothingness. Each lithophones are perhaps our oldest and most underappreciated instruments. Some are rough and rugged rock gongs dating back to the Neolithic. Some are modern and precisely cut, like sculptor Panuccio Sciola's Pietre Sonore. And some are just strange. Don't even get me started on Leland Sprinkle, who once turned an entire cave system into a giant playable organ, which to this day remains the largest instrument on Earth. Suffice it to say, the Ringing Rocks are not the only stones to sing. What I love most about lithophones is how unique they are. No two are exactly alike. No two sound completely identical. Even non-sonorous rocks have their charm. And when one breaks, the sound is altered forever. There will never be another lithophone quite like this one again. And yeah, obviously, I know, Levi, it's just a rock. Just go outside and pick up one of the 137 rocks, depending on how he defined live rock and dead rocks. On my visit in 2023, I repeated this experiment and found that 66 of the 237 rocks I tested were ringers, putting the percentage of ringers in about the same ballpark. The rocks on the inside of the field are far more likely to be ringers compared to those on the outside in contact with direct soil or those under tree shade behind the forest line. In a 1907 entry from Technical World magazine, William C. Richardson describes the sounds produced from these rocks as running upward, starting from middle D on the piano. But in my experience, field recording in the same spot nearly 115 years later, the tones produced from the rocks that show a lot of evidence of play rarely go as low as middle D. In fact, several frequency measurements I was given that were recorded from these rocks around the turn of the century seem to be quite a bit different in pitch than what is observed on the prominently played rocks today. So, what am I suggesting? Have the rocks changed in pitch somehow over the last 100 years? Maybe. Possibly. It's really hard to tell. The evidence is sparse, the data is inconsistent, and no one's done a comprehensive pitch survey across time. In fact, there's only been one academically published paper on the Ringing Rocks ever, and it wasn't even from a geologist, it was from a physicist. It's also worth mentioning that literally every single geologist I've spoken to about this paper has dismissed its conclusions right out of hand. 100 years. There is a discrepancy between what's been written, what some geologists theorize, what other geologists theorize, and what I've... How much do a bunch of humans chipping away at the rocks with hammers every day affect their sound, if at all? Is there a minimum and maximum size for a ringing rock? Can live rocks go dead? If so, how? Do the size of the rocks correlate to their pitch? This one might seem obvious because in acoustic physics, generally the smaller something is, the higher its pitch. But this informal Allentech study seems to possibly call that assumption into question. But unfortunately, they only studied 5 rocks, which is a beautiful demonstration of what I'm getting at here. We need to go full nerd on this. We need to study the living daylights out of this place. In purely geologic terms, erosion is a process in which earthly materials are worn away and moved by natural forces, like water or wind. Human intervention might not be considered in the truest scientific definition of the word. You probably couldn't call humanity's effect on this field erosion, but for some reason, I can't get that word out of my head. I think that I'm so wrapped up in this because on some level, I'm irrationally terrified that we're going to lose the Ringing Rocks, the same way that we lost the music that was performed there a century ago. Part 3, A Forgotten Song. In 1880, a physician and part-time musician, John J. Ott, or as his friends would call him, JJ, gave a performance here at the Ringing Rocks for the Buck Wampum Historical Society. The Buck Wampum Historical Society would meet at one of the Ringing Rock sites annually, and on their third ever meeting, JJ Ott performed with his brass band a selection of songs. For reference of how piercingly loud some of these rocks can sound in person, an account at the time suggested that they could be clearly heard over JJ Ott's brass band, which is a testament to these rocks' ability to cut through a mix. Of course, all we have of that day are written accounts, as no recordings or photographs were taken. From the suggestion of local historian William J. Buck, rocks weighing around 200 pounds each were carefully selected from the rock field, tuned by chipping away at their surface, and then arranged onto a horizontal pitch frame. We have record of at least 2 songs that Ott played that day, Home Sweet Home, and no, not the one by Motley Crue, the 1823 operatic banger by John Payne. That side note was apparently so moving of a song, it was banned from being sung in Union camps in the Civil War for being too, quote, likely to incite desertion. And the second song, which is what I'm interested in, an original composition by Ott entitled Sounds from the Ringing Rocks. There is no recordings from that day, and as far as I can tell, Ott never wrote down any notation for his song. Now, curiously, there is an 1873 instrumental piano piece with the same name by composer B. Frank Walters. So maybe Ott was actually playing that song and the Historical Society's accounts were incorrect? It's actually more possible than you might think. There are a bunch of articles that back up the claim that this song was indeed an original, but they all lead back to the same source, and it doesn't seem like any independent sourcing has ever been done. But who knows, maybe he was just inspired by the title. It's been known to happen. For what it's worth, all accounts do back up the claim that Ott's Sounds from the Ringing Rocks is an original. Like I said, there are no recordings of that day, but I thought I might take a listen to B. Frank Walters' Sounds from the Ringing Rocks just to get a feel as to what could have been an inspiration for Ott's piece. But to my surprise, there are no recordings of B. Frank Walters' Sounds from the Ringing Rocks, at least none that I've been able to find. But I was just too darn curious about it, so I managed to track down the original sheet music. I don't actually play piano that well, so I asked my friend Webster to take a swing at what could possibly be the first ever recording of this 100-plus-year-old song.
It's just a busy road all of a sudden.
Gotta love those early American Steamboat Willie vibes. If I wanted to orchestrate this onto the rocks with a brass band, it might sound like this. But that's my spin on it, and likely quite a bit different than what Ott could have played that day. The fact of the matter is that we'll never actually know what John J. Ott's Sounds from the Ringing Rocks actually sounded like. All accounts claim it to be an original, and there's no evidence to suggest that Mr. Ott borrowed anything than perhaps the name from B. Frank Walters. So it makes a forensic post-music theory analysis nearly impossible. Sure, we could take the other song we knew for a fact he played that day, Home Sweet Home, and extrapolate maybe a key from some old sheet music and maybe find some common notes between that and Sounds from the Ringing Rocks, but I don't know, that seems dubious. The stones that Mr. Ott tuned, bound, and played that day have since disappeared, presumably put back with the rest of the rocks, and will likely never be found amongst the rubble of Stony Garden. And even if we could reconstruct Mr. Ott's lithophone, it's been a long time since 1880. The park sees thousands of visitors every year. All that chipping away at the rocks may be altering their tones and pitch irrevocably. It bothers me that John J. Ott's Sounds from the Ringing Rocks is lost amongst this field of stone. It feels like a piece of history has disappeared beneath my feet. Like I have all the puzzle pieces, but I don't know what I don't know. And so I don't have the capacity to understand how it all fits together.